guitar legend Gordie Johnson of Big Sugar. After our interview, when I asked him, who can you think of? He said, Ricky Paquette, the great Canadian icon. Gordie Johnson chooses you to
Thanks,
tag
Gordie.
in to the podcast. And
Yeah.
that's how we ended up here today. And I wanted to start off this episode powerfully. So I reached out to one Gordie Johnson and I got some kind words to share with you. So this is
Oh
from Gordie
man.
Johnson, a Big Sugar. He was our guest back on episode number 77. This is what Gordie has to say. Let me just set this up properly here.
Come
Okay.
on.
So Gordie says, rock and roll guitar playing has become the most predictable and mundane of all styles, to the point that I hardly pay attention. Then suddenly we meet this guy, Ricky. I can watch him play for hours. Just when you think you know what's coming next, he plays something so imaginative and passionate that it grabs your attention and reminds us that rock and roll is risky, frisky, and soaked in whiskey. He's the kind of guitarist that makes you want to run home and practice. So that's from the great Gordie Johnson of Big Sugar. That might be the best quote ever. I got to say that again. It reminds you that rock and roll is risky, frisky, and soaked in whiskey. How good is
Man,
that?
I'm speechless coming from that guy. That's crazy. Oh man. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be able to say that he's become a great friend. And oh man, those are super kind words. Like, it's so strange to hear that from. I think I'm gonna have to use that quote in my bio.
I'll have to like
Yeah.
send you the exact quote and
Yeah.
and send you this video clip so you have it as documented proof from Gordie
Well, not
Johnson.
talking about Gordy, if we're digging into that, I mean, I've known about Big Sugar. I mean, I grew up in Gatineau near Ottawa, and I like to say that I learned pretty much all I know about music listening to Shea 106, the classic rock station in my dad's garage and stuff. And Big Sugar still play to this day. They play like, I don't know, 10 times a day. It's crazy. Like every time I walk in there, still to this day, it's like Big Sugar song number one. And then we're out in the yard and another Big Sugar song comes on. So I've known about Big Sugar and their sound and stuff for years. Uh, and the way they come from the blues and they kind of integrate like rock and roll and
Little
some
reggae.
reggae and some different, just the sounds are so different. I always liked them. And then I kind of moved away from my parents and lived in Montreal and was into other stuff. And uh some other bands from Montreal and from Quebec worked with Gordie and stuff. So I kind of knew he was doing some producing stuff. Forgot about that again, and I was touring with different artists, doing some producing and recording and writing and touring with other people. And then when it came time to do my own thing after coming back from Nashville, the whole thing happened. I had this kind of opportunity to have a record deal with a Quebec label, and I had a whole bunch of demos. And then they started asking, well, we're still in the pandemic, but if you had like to make a list of who you'd want to work with as producers, like who would it be? And so I was like, man, I don't know. Like I haven't really thought about it all that much. I was focusing on songwriting, and in my head I was like, oh, it'll kind of happen when it's time, but the time kind of showed up quicker than I anticipated. Basically, I wasn't thinking I was going to make an album like right away. But it seemed like a great time because I was off from all my other projects. So I was like, let's make the most out of this time. And I had a few other names on there, but I thought about it. I was like, Gordie Johnson is definitely one of them that I know is Canadian. It needed to be a Canadian producer also. So I was like, you know what? I'll put down a couple of names. And the management at the time, they reached out to some of the other guys and weren't really getting any feedback. And but I think took like one day or something. They wrote an email to Gordie's management and stuff, and I remember it really didn't take very long. They got an email back, and I can't remember what it said, but it said somehow they were interested, they were intrigued or something. So the first step was kind of like to get on a phone call with Gordie and start talking just to feel the vibe because Gordie doesn't really just do a gig to do a gig. Like he wanted to know why I wanted to work with him and who I was as a person. So we started talking on the phone. I'll always remember the first time I spoke to him. I was at my parents' basement, and I had just come out of the shower. My hair was all wet, and I was like, "Oh man, I got this phone call coming." I was like stressed out. I was like, "I don't know, how is this gonna go? I never met the guy. I don't know what kind of person he is, and like, what am I even gonna tell him?" Like, I was all that stuff that goes through your mind, obviously, when you're like trying to figure out why this is happening at this time, and in the weird time in my life, it's like all of a sudden I'm going to be working. How am I even going to get to Texas to work with this guy and stuff? So I always remember I said, "Oh, I'm just ready for our conversation, nice and fresh out of the shower." And say, "Well, I'm not nice and fresh out of the shower. It's really hot here in Texas." And so it all started as a very, very kind of down to earth conversation, and that really put me at ease. I was like, I feel very comfortable with this guy. And then we started talking about music, and I kind of got pretty intrigued because his whole approach was, let's talk. And not even we talked about so many things way beyond music before we even started talking about if we were going to record together. He really wanted to know me as a person and ask me a few questions, and then we give each other a time and date for next week, and I had to think about certain things. And he kind of became this professor to me, which was
He's like a
very,
guru, musical
yeah,
guru.
musical guru. And what I really appreciate is like throughout his conversations, I kind of it really was helpful for me to dig back into my deepest roots of the reason why I started playing music, of the reason why I wanted to do this again, like doing my own project, what I wanted my new project to sound like. Because, we talked about me doing a whole bunch of different styles of music with different people. And so, in his kind of Gordie way, he was pretty sneaky as to how he would ask that to me. He wouldn't ask like a direct question, and then he'd come back with like really like amazing lines and saying like, I was really into country at that point. I'd just come back from Nashville, and then one thing led to the next, and we started making more like rock and roll music again. I was like, man, this really feels like me. And we didn't have to think about it or talk about it all that much. I'm sure he has, and I kind of did in my own way, but it's not like we said, okay, I want my album to sound like this. None of that really happened. It was basically like a big ping pong game because unfortunately we were never able to be in the same room to make this record. So it all started off us kind of writing together and stuff, remotely through Zoom and all that, thinking we were going to wait it out and be in the same room to make this record. At one point, it's just, time was passing by and we weren't able to kind of find the time, and we didn't want it to, you know, we didn't really want to wait for 5 years to make a record. So I sent him a couple of ideas, sent me back some like tweaks. He made me work on some lyrical stuff. That line he said about like the soaked in whiskey. I could totally hear Gordie in that line. It's amazing. He's a great lyricist. He's very inspiring guy. Like, I mean, I knew him as a big sugar rock and roller with the whole reggae thing going on. But now that I know him, he's an amazing guy to analyze a situation and just make the best, like put everything he thinks is the best together, and not really uh mess with the core essence of what it is, whether it be lyrically or musically. I feel he doesn't care about perfection. He cares about something that makes people feel something, which is something for me that was like, that really got to me. I was like, you know what, at a point where I was hearing all these new country stuff things happening, and I was like really into like making things perfect. He brought me right back to reality and into my really deepest like roots, like I said. And it's like the southern rock stuff, the old like the old blues influences, the country stuff that I liked. That I and my parents on my mother's side, they were like really into country, and I didn't really know where the country thing came into my like into my life because I considered myself more of a like a classic rock kind of dude. But my mother's family were way into like outlaw country, and then we talked about that, and it's like Yeah, I like Nashville. I thought, but throughout our conversations, I felt it was a little on the pop side of things. So we dug into the deeper outlaw country roots, and you could totally hear that on the record too. So it was a very cool adventure to work with this guy. And I mean, I could talk about this guy for so long, and we now have these great conversations. We talk about music, talk about guitar, and all sorts of different things. But oh man, I don't even know where I'm going with this, just because it's actually mind blowing that we got to do this, and I hope we get to do it again for sure.
I was going to say, even if you didn't end up working with him, just having that original phone call with, a legend in Canada, someone you grew up listening to their music, just that phone call alone would have been an amazing, memory to have.